At the end of the last episode, we talked about how the Vikings discovered North America around the year 1000. At the same time that was happening, the then king, Olaf Tryggvason, was the first to attempt to abolish the Norse mythology and become Christianized. But, however, he died in the Battle of Spaldar in the same year. This agenda was later revived by the king Olaf Haraldsson, starting in 1015, when he made the things pass church laws, destroyed pagan temples, built numerous churches, and created an institution of priests. His subjects feared that this would strip them of their powers, since many derived from pagan traditions, and, as a result, they revolted. Both sides met in the Battle of Stiklestad in 1028, where Olaf was killed. This made the church elevate Olaf as a saint and made Nidaros, modern-day Trondheim, the Christian center of Norway. This made Norway fall into a personal union with Denmark and England under the Danish king Knut the Great, leading to the formation of the North Sea Empire. This rule was majorly unpopular in Norway, and when Knut died in 1035, the empire was dissolved and Norway was once again independent. This meant that, from the 1040s until 1130, the country was at peace, which only ended that year due to some unclear succession laws, which allowed all of King Sigurd's sons to rule jointly, which led to a civil war. To prevent more succession crises like this, Archdiocese of Nidaros was created in 1152 and attempted to control the appointment of kings. Inevitably, the church needed to take sides in the civil war, which eventually ended in 1217, with Haakon Haakonsson becoming king of Norway, and finally introducing a clear law of succession, where solely the eldest son inherits the throne. Over the 3 centuries mentioned before, Norway saw its population almost triple and saw the growing power of the king, as in 1000 all the farmers owned their farms, but in 1300 around 70% of them were owned by the king, the church, or the aristocracy. This happened because, in poor times, farmers borrowed money and weren't able to pay it back, so their lands were confiscated. Nevertheless, this was nothing like the serfdom that was practiced in the rest of Europe, since Norwegian farmers were free to leave and travel. This new century is described as the Norwegian Golden Age, since peace was in charge and there was a massive increase in trade, especially with the British Isles and Germany, with the Norwegian trade being controlled by the Hanseatic League. Due to this, a trade center in Bergen was established. But trade can be dangerous, and in 1349 the Black Death arrived in Norway, and in less than a year it had already killed a third of the population. Other plagues also arrived, and by 1400 the population was already reduced by half. This wiped out numerous communities, which resulted in an abundance of land, allowing farms to practice animal husbandry. This also led to less taxes being collected, which weakened the king and the aristocrats' power. In 1380, the Norwegian king died without a successor, which led to, once again, the country being ruled by the Danes, with Olaf Haakonsson as king of both kingdoms, and, in 1397, under Margaret I, the Kalmar Union was established, with Sweden joining the personal union. She waged numerous wars against the Germans, which controlled the trade routes, and resulted in a trade blockade to the Union, which led to an increase in taxation, and consequently to the Engelbrekt Rebellion in 1434 to 1436, which was led by the Swedish miner and nobleman Engelbrekt Engelbrektsson, and weakened the Danish power within the Union, even though they still held the majority of power. Norway was still too weak to pull out of the Union at this point. Margaret continued her centralization policy since Denmark had more population than Sweden and Norway combined, and in order to soften the trade blockade hurting Denmark, she also granted trade privileges to Hanseatic merchants of Lubeck and Bergen, which hurt the Norwegian economy even more. Along the years, Norway slipped ever more to the background under the Oldenburg dynasty that now ruled the Union. There was one revolt under Knut Alfsson in 1502, and in 1513, Norwegians got some affection for King Christian II, who resided in the country for several years, leading to Norway siding with Denmark during the events which led to Swedish independence from Denmark in 1523. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and subscribe to know what happens next. See you next time!